Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Somebody said Yasher Koach over there. I haven't even said anything yet. All right. This is an interesting one. And this is sort of stewing and percolating in my mind against the backdrop of Juneteenth and how it is that we do memory in this country in national and collective and sacred ways against the pain and suffering that we have caused on some level. How it is we do memory is an interesting thing to me. So, going back to 17, Korach thing. I'm going to recap it real quick. We have the Korach rebellion, Datan, Abiram, all these people who come out, and we have another one of these interesting things, what one of my students at Hillel used to refer to as a God-off, where two groups or peoples offer their God offering, and then we see what happens. And so Korach and his people do not pass the test, and the earth opens up and swallows them and their households. All of this stuff, they go down into Sheol, the pit, etc. Now, what I want to emphasize here is the nature of the contest here. Moses says to Korach, "Tomorrow you and your company appear before the Lord, you and they and Aaron. Each of you take your fire pan and lay incense on it. And each of you bring your fire pan before the Lord, 250 fire pans, and Aaron bring your fire pans too, and everybody brings their fire pans, whatever." This is the mechanism by which we're going to see what works and who succeeds in the God-off, so to speak. Now, 17 is where this gets really interesting to me. Korach and them bring forward their pans. They do this ritual thing with their fire pans and their incense. The earth opens up, swallows them. That's the end. But 17 opens and says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, order Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, to remove their fire pans, for they have become sacred from amongst the charred remains. Scatter the remains of the rebellion. However, take the fire pans of those who have sinned at the cost of their lives. Let them be made into hammered sheets as plating for the altar." What do you make of that? They take the mechanism, the substance, the thing of delivery, the fire pans of the rebels, the bad guys, and God says, okay, we got to clear away the ashes, all of the debris from the explosive resolution of that, but keep their fire pans, for they have become sacred. The incense offering tool of the bad guy has become sacred even at the cost of the lives of the bad guys. What do you make of that? They did something rebellious and wrong and evil and all those things and whatever, and yet God says they have become, their pans, their tools have become sacred. Yeah, go ahead, Cynthia.
Are we using the word sacred that's like set apart? Because it makes a lot of sense to me that they would be set apart because they've been used as a part of this sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue sort of violent exercise that then could be used as a tactic to warn people or perpetuate fear so that they don't try to instigate things again.
Very good. So maybe this is a warning of sorts, kind of like how the British Empire, when they would hang pirates, would stick their heads on pikes outside of harbors and stuff. You get to be an example for the others, so to speak. Josh.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that.
Okay.
That it was going to be a symbol and a warning to anybody who tries to pull it kind of thing again.
Okay, Josh is bringing a similar reading to Simcha. Yeah.
But even life, every life has a meaning.
Mm.
Lives were lost, and they have to remember, even though they did things that were evil.
In case everybody didn't hear that, every life has a meaning, and even the lives that were lost in this rebellion, which we get characterized as sinful here, those are still lives that we need to remember on some level. Rabbi.
I was just thinking, and just going back to the simplest one, is that I think that there's a bit of a catch-22 in this moment where it's like that. So they've been commanded, Korach and his band, right, to bring these pans, right, in an act of worshiping God, right. Even though it gets rejected, the problem is those things have actually legally, halakhically, they're actually called hektish. They can't. It means that they've been made for it. They cannot be used as anything else. So even though they were involved in something that like actually led to a lot of death and led to loss of life, right? There's some tool. It's a tool.
The levers, it's their tools.
It's their tool, and it's like so they but they have to preserve it. It cannot be used for anything else. It has to be used for some kind of sacred purpose, which is like just kind of it really made me realize it tied into Howard's point really nicely, that it's like we cannot change the fact that all lives are holy. So that even when someone does something that we might look at as evil, we might and maybe is evil or harmful, et cetera, that's something. It's the catch-22. The thing is holy, and so we have to contend with it.
Cantor gives us the perspective of one of our medieval Mefarshim commentators who says, well, of course they're holy because they've been sanctified and designated for a holy purpose, even by people doing something unholy. They still have that designation. And so this tension between the holiness of the lives of those that were lost with the sin of what it is they were doing, held in tension. Yeah, go ahead, Diane, and then Mitch.
I was thinking along some lines to Camp Bromley, but I was thinking that unlike the golden calf,
Okay.
where even though they were challenging Moses, they were, I'm going to project, that in their hearts they were worshiping God, not an idol.
So another commentator, Ha'emek Davar, says that truly what these people did, goes with Diane on this, was sinful, but the thing is the place from which it came was not. They did something wrong, the Korach rebels, in undermining and challenging and attacking Moses, but that they did so out of the best of intention, that they wanted to be closer to God, and they saw Moses as creating this stratification and impediment and what have you. And so actually, this is one of these road to hell being paved with good intentions kind of things. So Diane also pulls up one of our medieval commentators. Thank you. Literally the road to Sheol being paved with good intentions. Mitch.
I was actually going to roll this forward about 1,800 years into...
Hold on, everyone.
Into our own history, which differentiates the thing, right, and how the thing was used from what its purpose could become. So in the Civil War, the large bell in South Carolina rang the secession of each state, got the name Columbia, and when Sherman took over South Carolina, they took that bell and they melted it down and made it into 2 bronze cannons to the use of the Union Army, in which, if you're Philadelphians, stood in front of Exposition Hall during the 1876 Exposition. So it differentiated the purpose and then made that purpose, if you will, wholly in the right direction by its reuse.
Okay, thank you, Mitch, for bringing, in particular, the historical Civil War thing. I thought Mitch was going to go in this semiotic direction of the signifier and the signified and Roland Barthes and all of those things from the 1960s, but he did not. He went to Civil War history, a place that Well, I would play in either one of those, but I am also going to a comparable place in just a moment. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I was going to kind of bring up the Civil War also, and a year ago, Judy and I were on a trip, and part of the trip was in South Carolina, and one of the side trips was to a plantation. And before we went, I didn't think too much about it, and then when I got there, it was abhorrent to me, and for what it represented. What was the plantation? It's an inanimate object. I mean, so the plantation itself was not guilty of anything. But the people that ran the plantation, in my opinion, were abhorrent. So I think that brings it to the Juneteenth type of situation. And so I guess that I guess it's what you make of it. And in my opinion, they didn't make much out of this plantation, and I still think it's abhorrent. So
Okay.
But at any rate, that's just I think a partial. Reckoning of that.
Okay, so a word on the semiotic piece. Semiotics gets into the idea of the signifier and the signified. I'm going to break it down kind of. The idea is if you see a red octagon with the letters STOP on it, what do you do if you're driving? Highway Patrol will be here to meet you after the service, Josh. Thank you for your response. Yes, ideally you stop. Now, the reason I bring this up is there is nothing intrinsic to a red octagon with English lettering on it that must make you stop. There is not a biological imperative that you must stop your vehicle anytime you see red octagons. But at the same time, it's automatic enough for us because we've grown up with this symbol. We've taken this symbol of the red octagon with the English lettering, or a hand going like this if you're in Israel, whatever, and we have imbued it. It is the signifier, is the red octagon. What is signified is that you must stop your vehicle before starting again. Okay? Y'all are with me so far. This takes us to the Civil War thing and to these objects and whatnot. I appreciate Mitch offering a Union-centric example of that because I did not grow up in the North. I grew up in the South. I grew up in North Carolina, and I think a lot about a famous statue that was planted right in the middle of the campus of the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill called Silent Sam. And Silent Sam was a monument to all of the Confederate soldiers who were graduates of the University of North Carolina or connected to it in some way or another, who fell in combat in the Confederate armies. This, as you might imagine, became fairly controversial in the last some years for good reason. Because we get now to that question of, you have the signifier, except in this case it's not the red octagon, it's a statue of a man with a rifled musket, but what does it signify? So there were multiple arguments about this in and around the University of North Carolina, and around the whole state of North Carolina, actually, about how, well, this represents a certain kind of heritage or Southern pride or something or other like that. And interestingly enough, there were folks who said, okay, we can take that as an argument, but look at where it comes from. So when did the statue go up? Josh?
I would guess like a lot of that during the early part of the 20th century.
That's right. This was not a statue that was put up by people who fought, died, whatever, it was part of the Confederacy. It was put up a good 50 years later to try and reinforce a certain kind of Confederate ethos. And so the purpose of it matters very, very much. And there are those with whom I would agree who would say, maybe you can't actually then revalue or rehabilitate the meaning of that thing in terms of memory. So there was a chancellor of the University of North Carolina. She resigned, and then as her last act moved the statue to a historical preserve on campus such that it is not out and leaning and watching over all of the goings-on in a contemporary state, but it is preserved as a certain kind of history of the place. It is interesting that she did this at a time when she knew she was already gone, because she knew of the kind of consequences she would have to pay for it, of the kind of controversy of it, but she did it amidst her resignation, moved it to a place of history rather than pure ideology. She didn't re-hammer the fire pan into plating for the altar that we saw, but she changed the surroundings of it. Instead of it having this place of prominence where all the students go by and whatever for everybody to remember its cause, it is now in this little tiny museum that has been set up for it to contextualize that piece of history and to give editorial language to it. It was not eradicated or destroyed. It wasn't destroyed, but it was refigured. If we're talking about Roland Barthes, the signifier and the signified, the signifier of the man with the rifle was no longer this thing of pride, but was this thing about understanding history from a careful and nuanced and possibly cautionary place. I want to argue that even though it didn't get hammered down into plating for the altar, it did get re-signified in a sense. And this is where I think the God piece around God saying that these things are sacred, I agree, or let me put it like this, I understand the reading of it that these tools have been signified and they have to be sort of remain as such because of their repurposing, their designation in this way. But to go in a sort of semiotic ideological direction, I think there is also the fact that those tools are now larger than life. They are not just hekdesh in this sort of sanctified, designated way. I want to say they represent something way bigger than a mere sheet. And that they represent actually one of these moments of people who may have thought they were doing the right thing, in point of fact, doing something horribly, horribly awry. And then they ultimately paid a grievous and profound price for it. And God says, no, we need to actually keep those. They can't remain in the form that they were, though. They cannot still serve as fire pans. They can't still serve as holy implements, but they have to be re-signified into plating. They have to be remade into something that, yes, does live with the altar, yes, does retain a certain kind of proximity, but it cannot be in service of the same goal. It cannot be in service of the same thing that it was before. I think there is a broader commentary here going on between these Confederate statues, the statue of and as well as the bell melted down into cannons. There is an interesting commentary there as well about taking a piece that, under the worst of circumstances, is imagined to be proclaiming some kind of liberation, being made into the martial tool of its undoing. There is a remarkable commentary there as well. But I think a piece that I'm holding, at least this weekend, is that memory is sacred. Memory is holy. There is no melting it down, eradicating it, pretending it didn't happen like the golden calf. And maybe the golden calf provides a certain kind of counterexample that, well, hey, we still read Ki Sa all the time. We haven't forgotten it. But that as we hold the vestiges and the elements and the articles of wrongdoing and of, dare I say, evil within our own society, we can't eradicate it and erase it. We actually have to remember it. But we need to do so in a way that revalues and resignifies it, that changes what it means to be in relation to the thing. I think that's a big piece of what we see in that discourse in and around Confederate statues, and I appreciate that as a discourse that leads us to think about how it is we take American history and we hold it and we honor it and we take it very seriously, but that it has to be reimagined and revalued and sometimes rehammered into the plates of the altar rather than being left as a fire pan of rebellion. Shabbat Shalom.